So let's just try her. Hi, Marianne, it's Teresa. Oh, it's probably not you. It's just, I did try to send you an invite just now.
Okay. And it's not coming up just yet.
Okay, well, maybe what I'll do is, do you just want to use Skype, or do you, if we used your phone and did what we did before with FaceTime?
Oh, sure.
Do you
we
think
can do that? That's probably easier.
Are you on Wi-Fi, so that won't cost you $1 million?
I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to do it.
But is your phone on Wi-Fi?
Actually, it is right now.
Okay, if it's on Wi-Fi, then it's not going to cost you anything. So that'll be okay. Right. So why don't I try to FaceTime you right now?
Okay, sounds perfect.
How many people have you got?
Everybody's gathering here, so.
How many people have you got? Oh, it's gone. Do you mind if we try FaceTiming instead?
So we'll be just watching it off your phone?
Yeah, basically, and I'm on Wi-Fi too, so it shouldn't cost us anything to do that. Because it looks like the, anyway, it just looks like this isn't working for her. It's a very small screen. I guess the worst comes to worst, we can just do phone. Because it doesn't seem to be connecting on my phone either. She's just not picking up. Sorry, it's annoying, but I'm just giving it a little bit of time in case she does pick it up. Hi, Marianne. It's like she's picked it up. She doesn't know she's picked it up.
Is that them talking?
Yeah. Marianne? That's like she doesn't know she's picked it up. That's what I'm getting, is that she's talking away, but she doesn't know she's got us there somehow. She might have picked it up. I don't know how you do it. Maybe I'll call her one more time. I'm so tenacious. Just hoping that the ringing will.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Oh, you're right. She's not picking it up. Hi, Marianne. Hey, Marianne. Hi there. Is that Marianne? What's that?
FaceTime did, yes.
So I tried the FaceTime and it didn't work. It didn't connect.
It didn't connect, yes.
So was it just the Wi-Fi, you think?
It may be. Let me go back to my LTE and see if we can do it that way. And
Why don't you
call me in another minute, okay?
Yeah, but just one more thing.
Sure.
Do you want it? Have you got Hangouts set up?
I've got the regular Hangout set up, yes.
Okay, why don't I just call you one more time on the regular Hangouts, not Hangouts on air? Because that worked this morning.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yes, it did. Okay,
We'll
give it a try.
Okay, so I'll give it just a minute until you're at the computer, because I did just try you. And
all right.
Yeah, we'll try it again, okay?
All right, very good.
Talk to you in a minute.
Bye.
Because her phone is using Wi-Fi, which is never very good. But the Hangout, she's got her computer hardwired into their system, so the broadband will be very fast. I'll just give it a minute and try her.
So who's Marianne? Is she?
Marianne Goodwin is both colleges share administration. So Spokane Falls and I forgot what the other one's called, Spokane College, I think, are under, so they have one library, one VP, one all that. And so she's the chief librarian for both colleges.
Okay.
And she's been working with me on the book club with the posters around and setting up the TED Talks this year and that kind of thing so that we can get our faculty. We're planning a educational symposium in June for our staff and their staff to attend, a one-day thing in Spokane. So
Right.
she's been my chief contact there. So she invited us to attend this a couple of days ago. So let's see now. I think to do this, I think I might just start a new conversation. Hope I'm inviting the right Marianne Goodwin. This is the one that it was last time. Does that say anything that kind of concerns me a little bit? Is that... Oh, you know what? Just in case it's not the right Marianne Goodwin, I'm just going to. Oh no, I'm going to. She hasn't had anything about her. Just thought if I double clicked on her thing, I would for sure have the right person because this is who we were. I was talking to her this morning. There's two no-name Marianne Goodwins. See what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that's
Call
what
her
it
and
is.
ask her to. Could she call you? Can she contact you?
She could. She did this morning.
Do we have a book in the library?
Yeah. I think we give it a few more minutes and then we give up.
I might run upstairs and read the book.
Okay.
Just read the book.
And maybe, yes, go for it. It's, I can just.
You've read it already?
I have.
So it's probably more interesting to you to hear them discuss it after you've read it because I don't really know anything about it.
So I guess the last thing I could do is just call her one more time and see if we can listen in by phone. It's not, it'll be fine for the first little bit. Just love to at least have you meet some of these people that are so interested in it, that are faculty in Spokane. That would be the added benefit of it.
Forwarded to an automated voice messaging system.
Ah, there you go.
For God's sakes.
I know.
Well, we should have just driven down there.
I
Would have
know.
been easier. Except we can't go to the States because the dollar is so horrible.
I know, it's so expensive.
This is Marianne.
Hey, Marianne, you sound tired out with technology.
Yeah, well, we started, so
Do you
I
think
just
we
wanted
could
to.
do you think we could just listen in, Carol Andrews and I, who are here on this side of things, just using your speakerphone?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure. Let's just keep this conversation open. Okay.
Okay. If we can hear
I
anything.
think so. Yeah, we don't pick up your voices.
Hmm.
Too quiet. You know, what would be good for you is just to put your earphones in and listen to it there because
could be. Marianne, could you put us closer to Laurie?
That's one of the ways that the causal termination experience will get advanced. Because some causal tribal members perceive it as a way to enact their tribal sovereignty in the most important ways that they can. So before, I've got a bunch of questions, but I want to open up the guys. One is there's before.
Is your speaker on the back side?
Does anyone have something else maybe?
It's gotta be really, her phone has to be really close. I can't hear. That's her, that's the Aboriginal coordinator speaking to, asking her questions about her book.
Are they going to film it at all? Are they going to film it?
Marianne, is there any way that you can bring us a little closer?
Yeah.
To, because we actually can't hear her at this point.
And so, in fact, I was reading Termination and Relocation. Shut up. I was reading the book Termination and Relocation, and in that book, Donald Pixico referenced the Klamath Tribe and termination. And so I was in graduate school at that time, and I was talking to my parents, and I said, well, this is ridiculous. You know, this never happened. And they said, no, it did happen. And so they were living in Tacoma at the time, and they were going to some of those off-reservation meetings about it, but no one ever talked about it in the time that I was growing up. So I came to it academically. I grew up in Eastern Washington, Australia. Like, very quick child, probably aren't paying attention anyhow, but that my lack of knowledge was no different than yours growing up in a family that had been participating in it. That really does speak to your comments earlier about how this is not an open topic really, and yet it was all consuming for so long. Yeah, I think that it was such an important and divisive time for our community. I mean, I talk to people today who say, you know, there are brothers who don't talk to each other anymore, who haven't talked to each other since the 1960s because of their differing views on termination. And so it isn't anything that people were discussing casually. And also for a lot of people that I spoke to in casual conversation about this during my research, they felt like, well, it didn't happen, so it doesn't matter to us today, you know. And so whether we agree with that or not, that is sort of one of the big perspectives. Not that it isn't important, but that in terms of our day-to-day tribal life, it doesn't matter. So you mentioned that several bands were brought together for the reservation, and I'm afraid that most of us just think of the Caldwell Reservation as one. So do the multiple bands have identity that they are working on to make sure that they're recognized? What does that look like? Yeah, so there are 12 bands on the Caldwell Reservation, and each is distinctive. There's been a lot of intermarriage. And so many people have multiple band identities, for example, but as part of the language revitalization, for example, there are now 3 dialects that people are learning. And so 3 dialects of the Salish language that have been traditionally spoken within our tribal peoples. And so now when you call the tribe, for example, if you don't reach someone right away, or even if you do, they answer in Salish. And so people are learning their different dialects and carrying that in through really indigenizing the reservation space again.
Where Canadian residents interplaying the Canadian policy. They don't need to go to conversation about their recognition of the tribes.
Yeah, so Tony asked about context between the U.S. and Canada recognizing some of the caldwell bands. So the Okanagan, which is one of the caldwell bands, the Okanagan Nation in Canada is recognized at the Arrow Lakes, the Sinaiaks are not. And Canada considers the Arrow Lakes extinct, and so the U.S. does not. And so that's part of what Virgil Seymour, as the Arrow Lakes facilitator who works for the Caldwell Tribes, does up in Canada with folks at Selkirk and beyond to engage both sides of this sort of fictional, in tribe perspective, fictional boundary. Well, they didn't have policies the same way that we have policies. So they have, I think, Teresa, can you remind me, it's called the Indian Act, is that right?
We do. We have the Federal Indian Act, yeah.
Federal Indian Act. So it's one umbrella. And so they don't have treaties in the same way that there are treaties between U.S. tribes and That's not quick. I didn't mean to say that. We do have the Federal Indian Act, and then in some cases, there are treaties. In this particular area, there is just one treaty at this time, and one that's in progress. It's quite complicated, but the federal government does actually enact treaties here in Canada. So. You have treaties, but they're not as pervasive.
They're not. That would be accurate. Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a different approach. I think it's maybe sort of a bigger scale, Teresa, would you say? So instead of tribe by tribe, it's more region by region.
Yeah, Jessica just joined us, and we also have Carol Andrews here, who's a faculty member. Yeah, I wouldn't. Go ahead, Jessica.
Well, I think a lot of the treaties are more in the eastern part of Canada, all the way up until like Alberta, and then I think in BC there wasn't. I think they've just started treaty process like within the last few decades. So BC is all unceded, mostly for the most part. There's a big treaty down on the island with the Nisga'a Nation, and then there's some treaty talks in other parts of the province as well. But no, I think that the treaties they're region to region, and sometimes there's multiple tribes, or in Canada they're called nations, that are involved in sort of like one regional treaty, and then there's nation and nation treaties. They're very diverse. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about that.
So while our treaty period ended, I think this is an important distinction for us to realize. The U.S. treaty period ended in 1871, but the Canadian treaty process is ongoing.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And right now, there's a lot of action to challenge some of the treaties because they have not really, in a lot of cases, they have not been honored. And so right now, our federal government is really being challenged on those treaties to hold up to what the original agreements were. And so we're definitely in a very strong period of change right now, because there was a big period of time where they were almost disregarded in a lot of scenarios. So yeah, it's definitely changing right now.
So one of our guests is asking about Canadian removal, First Nations removal. Was it similar to the U.S. experience?
Geez, we weren't prepared to answer questions. We just thought we were coming to listen to you, Laurie. Boy, it's making me sweat. Yeah, I've got sweat on my brow. So your question is, was there redirection of people on reservations here in Canada to the U.S.? Is that the question?
No, more like removing First Nations people from their traditional homelands and relocating them so sort of the equivalent of like the U.S. Indian Removal Act or the reservation moving people. I know that you have reserves, so was it a similar process? Do you know to what U.S. tribes experienced?
Well, the thing I found interesting about your book is that you talked about how 12 tribes came together in one location, and maybe that was similar here. I actually don't know enough about it to know, but that sounds and because they came from some of those tribes were coming from a long ways away. That sounds unusual. Carol said, looks like she could say something here.
Well, British Columbia is unique in all of Canada, actually, because of the lack of treaties that were signed. And so people, First Nations people in British Columbia, didn't really move very far from their original traditional territories. Some people were moved, but not long distances. So for instance, the Newhalk people up in the Bella Coola region, there were communities that were moved from very isolated places to one central location. That wasn't their choice, but because of the Indian Act and other policies, they were forced to move to a central location, but they weren't moved outside of their actual traditional territories.
So it would be different in your case with the Colville Confederated Tribes because people came outside of their territory to the Colville Confederated Tribes. So that might be the difference.
And there was one place I think six.
Well, I think more broadly when we think of removal, we think of the Cherokees, going on the Trail of Tears, and from the Carolinas and going into Oklahoma. So some of the Colville Band did come from slightly further away, but still really within the Columbia Plateau.
Right.
There was other things that impacted Indigenous peoples. It was kind of a removal, but it was done through the residential schools and also through a baby scoop that happened in the 60s where they took First Nations children and adopted them into white families. And so that right now is currently coming out in more public awareness, because I know there's people, like I was born in the 70s. I know a lot of people in the earlier part of the 70s, even at that time, were part of the baby scoop, and they're just coming, to terms now with this idea that they've been removed from their traditional communities. And so that's a big that's on the forefront of a lot of people's thinking, with the residential schools. We've just gone through a big commission to gather stories from residential school survivors. It was a 5-year commission that was brought out by by a settlement with the federal government and First Nations survivors to just bring those stories out because they were hidden for a long time. So that kind of removal happened quite rampant and impacted generations of Indigenous peoples.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was interested generally in federal policy, but I had never heard of termination until I read. Well, I had heard about it in undergrad, but in the midst of everything else. And so when I found that Colville story, that's what really sparked for me. Anyone else have anything you want to bring up? I would say that it's still a very understudied policy, and that we are also an understudied region. And so I hear a lot from people read the book is I had no idea really who the Cobbles were, and B, I can't believe that this almost happened. And so, I think people are using the book in all different kinds of classes in different ways, and so I'm really happy that it's included as part of Reading Region because people know so little about our region that anything that we can share to help reveal the complexities of this place and the vibrancy, of this place. When we now have our firmly established link to Kennewick-Man, to the ancient one, being a Cobble ancestor, if that had been a Sioux or a Navajo, we'd still be hearing about it, and yet it got hardly any coverage in terms of being a plateau person. And so it reinforces our space. It reinforces our heritage to this space of the Columbia Plateau, and this story and the way that, especially federal policy played out on the Columbia Plateau, reinforces that this was an indigenous space far longer than it has been an American or British space. I mean, Spokane is 150 years old or something, and the ancient one was here 9,500 years ago. And so it's really important for us to remember that. One surprising thing, I guess, to me was reading the numbers of the community. For some reason, I expected the Cobble Confederate Tribe to be a larger group of people, especially back in the 60s when this started. It seemed like a very small group of people had to make some really profound decisions about their future. And yet I thought it was a massive group of people, and it really wasn't, was it? Well, not only that, we have trouble between membership in terms of on-reservation, off-reservation, and that was one of the questions that was one of the things I kind of saw throughout the book, this recurring theme of trying to distinguish who's on reservation, who's off reservation, how much influence those bodies were having on domination. And also, the other thing that really stood out to me was this idea about voting behavior. And that by not voting, by being silent, was the idea, I believe you called it the true Indian way. I know you quoted somebody who said that. And that just really made me think about how much influence they had during their own space, but also how much influence the silence had, and how much that, and I couldn't really figure it out from the book in terms of your perspective, but how much influence do you think the silence had on domination? Did it keep it from going forward? Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah, that silence. I don't know. We have another Klamath tribal member here. And can I put you on the spot and ask, do you feel that resistance is still, that silent resistance is still a common practice? I mean, it's
Marianne, can you pass the phone closer?
Yeah, I'll let you read it. I won't speak for you. What was your question? Whether silence is still, silence as an expression is still something that people try to do. Yeah, I guess so too. Yeah. Sorry for that. It was extremely powerful in the Cobble termination debates because, and the pro-termination people recognized that. They knew that because the pro-termination people kept putting in their legislation, it has to be passed by the majority of people voting, not by a majority of people eligible to vote, because the people who disagreed simply didn't participate. And so that is, I think, something, if we look at the bigger picture of electoral politics in Indian country, both in terms of tribal voting and national voting, that's something we have to get better, Indian country has to get better about, is participating and casting a ballot instead of relying on that silent disapproval to carry the day, because in national politics that just doesn't work. But in the 1960s, during the determination era, it definitely did. It was effective. It kept making me think about statistical data. It kept making me think about statistical data that Congress would get, and the fact that that was actually influenced in Congress a little bit about whether or not the tribe actually agreed, because there was so many ballots that were being returned, and they were starting to question whether or not that meant that they wanted to participate or they didn't want to participate, or how the tribe felt. Yeah, and I'm ready to use that. We've got a faculty vote coming up about something, and so, you know, our constitution, our faculty rules at Gonzaga are written that it has to be passed by a majority of faculty members eligible to vote. And so I'm encouraging people that if they disagree, just don't vote, don't participate, because then that silence keeps the ballot from being effective. Then the election doesn't count, whatever the outcome is, because there is no quorum.
Is that Laurie?
No,
We'll find out.
Is someone speaking there? This is Jessica Morin speaking. I just wanted to, I'm sorry?
I said hello.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to say this was really a really monumental year for Indigenous people in Canada in terms of our federal election and the turnout. It was so wonderful. We just had an election in October, and so this was the largest Indigenous vote that we ever had come out, and they were running out of ballots on the reserves. It was so unprecedented. It was wonderful, because there has been a lot of apathy just because of, you know, their voices not really mattering or being heard in previous years, that a lot of people really don't want to vote because they don't want to really, like, people sometimes don't want to, I don't know, concede to that kind of process because it's so out of their process, their Indigenous process, that anyways, this was really neat. And there's a large youth vote. There was chiefs driving to people's houses to drive them, and it was wonderful. I think it largely shifted our vote to a more to the Democratic side of our political parties, and we did end up with a Liberal government, which was really surprising. It was an exciting election. And anyways, I wanted to say just one more thing about termination. Something else that happened in Canada that I forgot to mention, that was similar to termination. It was called disenfranchisement, and that's when Indigenous people either joined the army or became doctors or lawyers. They would lose their Indian status, which was what it was called at the time, or if they were an Indigenous woman marrying a non-Indigenous man, she also lost her status. So that's another way that they took people's identities, I guess, from them, their Indigenous identities. I just wanted to add that part.
Be very similar to termination.
Yeah, I mean, that's assimilation in really the broadest swath that you can imagine it, because in the U.S., when Native people decided to get allotments, they became citizens, whether they wanted to or not. The U.S. said, oh, great, you want to be a landowner, and now your reward is to be an American citizen. And so, but they still recognize that dual status. And so that's a really interesting contrast from what the U.S. government was doing as people sort of took on more American identities.
It's fascinating, Laurie.
And identity was a really big theme in your book, too, in terms of the debate, essentially, about whether or not they lose identity or whether they keep identity in relation to termination. And I was wondering if you could just kind of speak on some of that debate in relation to the identity and staying and maintaining that Indian identity. Yeah, I mean, identity is such a huge and complicated question, but one of the individuals who was among the terminated youth tribe said, well, they can never take it away from me. So they might say that I'm not Indian anymore, but they can't ever take that identity away. And so I think that was how Cabo people felt, was it doesn't matter what they say about us because we'll still be Indian. And the people who lived off reservation that had so little connection to the reservation, they were the ones who felt that their Indian identity was actually compromising their quote-unquote modern life. And so for them, separating, like being officially terminated by the federal government, in their opinion, would have helped them. But that didn't factor the rest of the community members who were so tied to this homeland as part of their identity.
Does anyone else pick up anything related to identity or related to kind of that debate between on reservation and off reservation members that they want to ask Laurie about or want to talk about?
The Klamath Tribe is almost the key thing. And I don't know if we're talking about a person with the same intelligence that is we're not because we thought they were totally terminated. Do we have any tribes in this area that we're going to
We can hardly hear.
that have actually hard over?
Well,
So the Canadian, I think,
Yeah, it's really worth
definition of that
Right.
definition of the Arrow Lakes as extinct is the Canadian government designation. So that's separate from termination. So the Kalispel tribe, actually, the termination era, their sort of recognition was very complicated, and so the termination era actually, in some ways, protected Kalispel recognition, and so that's how they were able to have this resurgence of their recognition. I think in the 80s, the 60s, and the 80s. There were 109 tribes and bands in the U.S. that were terminated. In our region, the Klamath Tribe is the most well-known tribe that was terminated, but they got their recognition restored in 1984, I think. So there was this Umpqua-Sayusla community in Oregon that fended off termination, and so they never lost their recognition, but the Klamath Tribe did and had it restored. But of those bands, those other bands, the Klamath and the Menominee are so far the most successful in getting their recognition restored. The other bands were in California. Many of them were in California, and they were very small bands, so they just didn't have the human resources to fight that battle.
There's a big language revitalization movement now in California run by an anthropologist in terms of trying to rebuild some of those languages for the California bands that are still present, and they still have elders that speak in the original languages.
Yeah, and those language revitalization programs are so often supported by Indian gaming revenues. And so Indian gaming is the current project that I'm working on, and what's so interesting about those revenues is that all of that money has to go back into tribal infrastructure. So there are some tribes, the very wealthy tribes, who use that as a per capita, but you have to have congressional approval to do that, and then that is taxable income. So our other per capita is essentially, it's like a shareholder return, and for us on our reservation, it's primarily from timber resources, and so the per capita has been quite small for my whole memory. But if we suddenly had a thriving gaming operation and we wanted some of that as a per cap, then that would become taxable income just like any other income. And so the funds from the Kalispel, from Northern Quest, from the Cabo casinos, from the Spokane casinos, each of those communities give to the Salish School of Spokane, for example, and supports that language revitalization. as well as in reservation communities. And so that's what's happening in California too. There's languages that they're trying to revitalize, or dialects of English. I mean, are there more that they're trying to bring back, or just kind of trying to build balance, or you think that's stronger? I think those are the three that they're focusing on. So at the Salish School, they teach Selkirk, which is Cabo Okanagan. They teach Spokane, and they teach Kalispell. On our reservation, they teach a couple of different dialects from that. So, so more the dialects of the bands that came from those Western territories, like Wenatchee and those groups. And are there similarities? Okay, I just think that I guess one for a little like out from those. Yeah, it's the same language, but so is that similar with the dialects, or is it separate languages? They're all part of the Salish language group. So, so it depends. I mean, there are some words in Spokane that sound very different than they do in Selkirk. So it just sort of depends. But in general, I think you can say that they sound similar enough that you can have a conversation. Yeah, I think that is like having an overlap, but then there's also these different things that we separate out the dialect. Like the history of 90% here, you know, and how much of that was Vega. Yeah. You know, like that someone interact, but that they didn't share or have. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the examples that the teachers of Kalispell language use is that the Kalispels tend to drop the last syllable. And so now they're trying to fight that in their language instruction, because if you're losing the last syllable of every word as you contract everything together, then it's hard to find the words to put back together. So that's something they're trying to, I think, drill out of the students as they learn it. Fascinating that there's, and I wonder if there's
No, I gotta get going anyways. I'm gonna go to the library.
I remember reading it.
I mean, it's on the book clubs, but there's several copies.
I have to read it. I feel more sort of understanding what.
Very excited about
Before you go up to see what to tell us who's there, or just want me to find out.
Sure, you could ask them. I'd still like to, yeah, I'd love to be able to take a trip down there and meet some of these people.
Because it'd be interesting to see who's interested.
Yeah, I mean, Salish is definitely on the list of endangered languages, and I think, you know, we can look at this at federal Indian policy and see how that happens. You know, through assimilation, through boarding schools, through in our case, you know, enrollment in the military, or being relocated to cities. The 1950s and 60s were a dark time to be Native in the United States, because there was a lot of prejudice. There was a lot of very active and angry racism, because in that post-war America, we wanted to be this homogenous, victorious society, right? Prosperous and happy, and Native peoples were a reminder of the past, of the, you know, the American past, and ways that Americans didn't want to acknowledge. And so people who spoke those languages, for example, had those traditional practices, kept that going. But it's, you know,